Kathleen. Hi, everybody, and thank you again for showing up for this wine tasting. I do think it's very apropos that we're enjoying some wine before the debate. If anyone's going to torture yourself with that tonight, this just seems like the perfect thing to do. So we have Jana Curtis from Cork and Barrel with us tonight, and she has chosen some wines from Elk Grove Vineyards in Oregon, and she will tell us all about those and that region. But first, I want to talk to you, Jana, about your job. You are, your title at Cork and Barrel is Wine Geek, and it's official because it's on your business card. And so I was wondering, what does a wine geek do? Let's talk about before COVID, because I know you conducted tastings in person, right? But can you kind of just describe what you do as a wine geek for Cork and Barrel? And she's, by the way, at the new store, which is in the old Hobby Lobby building on 23rd Street, as some of you might know from purchasing your wine there. But just to tell us about life as a wine geek.
Sure. Well, I actually started there 11 years ago, just as a clerk working Saturday nights. I was lucky enough to get promoted to retail manager after a few years. And then when the spot opened up for wine buyer at Cork and Barrel about 5 or 6 years ago, I was promoted to that position. So it started by just ordering more boutique stuff, helping customers, of course, customer service, and helping everyone just find their new favorite wine. Now that tastings are legal now that tastings were legal in Kansas, we started doing in-store tastings every Saturday from 2 to 4. Obviously, those have been postponed for the moment, but we're all looking forward to getting back into those. And we would also have a program called Wine Shares, where everybody could like kind of chip in and buy a little bit more expensive wine, and we would get together and drink those. They could be, we tasted a $300 bottle of wine one time. So it's a fun experience too, to just kind of, again, once we can get back together in person, we can start doing those again and exploring those, I don't know, a little bit fun, hard to find wines. But now I do pretty much all of the ordering for the store, and always customer service and helping everyone find what they're looking for, or maybe find what they don't know that they're looking for.
So why did you pick Elk Cove? And I think I said Elk Grove earlier, but why did you pick the Elk Cove vineyard from Oregon for tonight?
So when you asked me to speak at this, I thought it should probably be somewhere that I've been before, since we're kind of, visiting this area. Since that list is not super long yet, I had a few choices, but Elk Cove is especially fond to me because back in 2016, I was invited to a program called Oregon Pinot Camp. It's a 3-day long event for industry only people. About 270 people go every year. And the first vineyard that we had that we had like our first workshop on was actually Elk Cove. So it was the first vineyard I stepped foot on. Their wines, I really love their wines. I think they make delicious wines. I love the fact that they offer both the second label Pike Road, which is a little bit more affordable than a lot of Willamette wines. And they also offer those half bottles of the Elk Cove Vineyards estate wine. So they're all just good ways to kind of find out about these and not have to, break the bank or anything.
Yeah, a couple of notes of housekeeping that we need to touch on. One, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can put it in the chat. And we will also have little Q&A sessions after each of the wines that we taste. And for Jana's presentation, because she has some visual aids for us, maps and whatnot, I highly recommend that you put your And I think you mentioned the chat button, but the speaker view, did you talk about that, Kathleen, already? So so if you're not already there, I think I was writing down notes. Be sure to put it in speaker view so that her visual aids take up your full screen. Okay, and with that, let's let you just lead our tasting for us. And thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You bet.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today to taste and talk about Elk Cove and the wines of Willamette Valley. Before I really get into it, I'd like to invite you to open some wines if you have them. Of course, we're doing a tasting here, but we don't have to wait till the end till we start drinking. You probably already have your white chilled, so it might be a good idea to start there. But if you have your reds and you haven't opened them yet, these ones in particular definitely benefit from some air. So if you have some glassware around that you could pour them into, start giving them some oxygenation. It would be a great idea. It'll help the wines open up when we are ready to try those. So let's start by talking about Willamette Valley. The locals of this area have come up with a clever mnemonic device to help you remember the pronunciation of this area, and it goes like this. It's Willamette, damn it. That's it. But this AVA actually sits in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. So while there is a geological Willamette Valley, there's also an American viticultural area that's actually designated as the Willamette Valley. It spans from the Columbia River in the north to the southern tip of the Eugene, and from the Oregon coast on the west, the Cascade Mountains on the east. It's the largest of Oregon's AVAs. It's about 150 miles long and 60 miles wide. There are currently 7 sub-appellations in the Willamette Valley: the Dundee Hills, Sam Hill Carlton, Eola Amity Hills, Minville, Van Duzer Corridor, Shahala Mountains, and Ribbon Ridge. We'll talk about those a little bit later though. So even if the wine here hasn't been made for very long, there's a long history to how these vineyards were formed. My friend, Dr. Laura Murphy, who has her PhD in archaeology, was kind enough to lend me some rocks and soil samples as visual aids today. The parent material for the soils here consist of volcanic basalts, marine sedimentary sandstone and siltstone, or windblown loess. Here's a brief history of the why, how, and when. For about 35 million years, Western Oregon was on the floor of the Pacific Ocean, accumulating layers of marine sediment, which is now the bedrock of the oldest soils in the Willamette Valley. So I have some examples here. I don't know how well y'all can see this, but here's some sandstone. It's kind of a little flaky, formed of sand here. And then I also have a limestone sample. This one's really cool. Wish I could have saved this for last, but it actually has some of that marine sediment on it. There's some shells in there. You can see them. So this is what was laying on what is now Oregon back 35 million years ago. Then about 15 million years ago, the tectonic plates from beneath the Pacific Ocean and North America began colliding. So they're running into one another, and in the process are forming the mountain ranges on either side of the Willamette Valley. It pushed up the sea bottom, and it created the western coast of the United States, including Oregon, and that coast range on the west, and the Cascade Mountains on the east. During this activity from about 15 million years until about 6 million years ago, volcanoes that formed Idaho's Blue Range Mountains erupted, and this sent rivers of lava down the Columbia Gorge, covering the layers of marine sediments on the floor of the Willamette Valley. Once this cooled, the lava became a type of rock called basalt. She didn't have basalt, but she did have obsidian, which is also known as volcanic glass. She says mainly the biggest difference here is that this is like shinier and it's from like the hottest part of the volcano, whereas basalt is from less hot lava. You know what I mean, right? After that was a creation of a layer of wind-blown silts on the northeast facing hills west of where Portland sits today. This started as long ago as 1 million years and may have continued until about 50,000 years ago. These silts were blown from the valley floor, but originated from severely weathered basalts and sediments. So while some of this could have originated from what I just showed you, here is wind-blown loess. This one's a little bit harder to tell, but it's very fine and obviously very easy to be blown by the wind. Then some 15,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, massive ice dams in Montana were breached, sending walls of water rushing toward the Pacific Ocean at a speed of 60 miles per hour. The entire Columbia River Basin flooded up to the 400-foot contour level. Over 2,000 years, the Missoula Floods, as they're known, occurred again and again, each time creating a huge glacial lake where the Willamette Valley is today. The floods broke down the basalts and deposited hundreds of feet of rich sediments on the valley floor. So the soils of Willamette Valley were formed from these uplifted marine deposits, volcanic rock materials, or wind-blown sand and silt. She also gave me a couple of soil samples of what you might actually find in this area. Here's some alluvial soil, which is kind of hard to tell, but it's kind of brown. It's very fine as well. And then we have, sorry, I don't have a very big table. This is soil that's been formed from lake deposits. So lots of little rocks here. Next, we're going to talk about the Willamette Valley. I'm going to share with you all a map of the Willamette Valley now. I love visual aids in case you can't tell. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. So here is, okay, as you can see on the right, bottom right-hand side, there's Oregon. And the dark gray part of that is what we're zooming in on here is the Willamette Valley. The whole like green and yellow area there is the Willamette Valley. And then as you can see, those 7 sub-appellations are all pretty much in the northwest parts of Willamette. We'll talk a little bit about each of those from south to north. Oh, and on the left side of Willamette, you can see where the Coast Range is, kind of up against the Pacific Ocean. And then the Cascade is on the east side of Willamette. So you've got kind of a big bowl area there. So we'll start with the Duzer Corridor. This is actually, when I started researching Willamette Valley for this project, I was not aware of the Duzer Corridor because it just became an AVA in 2018. So it is super new, super young AVA. It sits along the west coast of the Willamette Valley, and it is actually along the Coast Range there. It's actually like a break in the Coast Range. So probably a big reason that it is its own sub-AVA is because it has kind of its own microclimate there, where everywhere else is a little bit more protected by those mountains. This one really lets in all of the coastal winds and weather. It experiences 40 to 50% stronger winds than the other AVAs in Willamette. Has the coolest summers because of those winds coming through the corridor.
Hey, Jana.
Yeah.
It's me.
Yeah.
I might have missed it, but what does AVA stand for? Some appellation, right?
Right. American Viticultural Area.
area. Okay, thank
So,
you.
yeah, sorry, it's just yeah, just like a legally defined area, which is actually regulated by the Tax and Trade Bureau in the United States. um,
Good to know.
I know. It's like, okay, not the FDA. Okay. But yeah, so that's the Van Duzer Corridor. To the east of that, you see the Eola Amity Hills. It sees a lot of cool air flowing through that gap in the Coast Range, so it's also relatively cooler in climate than a lot of the other AVAs. Soils here are derived from a combination of the volcanic basalts and sediment. McMinnville, which is just north of Van Duzer, right up there, sits in a rain shadow of the Coast Range. And what that means is maybe the opposite of what I might automatically think. Since there's that range right there of mountains, when clouds are coming up over them with precipitation, they actually drop all the precipitation right before they go over the mountain. And so as it comes across the range over to McMinnville, there's less moisture than a lot of the other appellations over there. So it's actually relatively warm and dry. It has shallow uplifted soils, which are derived from marine sediment. The Dundee Hills, which is going to be just east of McMinnville, is actually where Willamette's first Pinot Noir was planted. Soils were formed mainly from ancient volcanic basalts, and it enjoys good drainage and favorable exposure for both rainfall and sunlight. Next, we have the Shahala Mountains. So those are just north of the Dundee Hills on this map. It's a single 20-mile-long landmass made of several hilltops and ridges. Most soils are basalts and marine sediment. The more northern-facing slopes tend to be covered in loess. At more than 68,000 acres, this is the largest AVA within the Willamette. In fact, Ribbon Ridge, which is just to the west of that, is actually a sub-AVA of the Shahala Mountains. So it's a sub-AVA of a sub-AVA. This one actually got its own status because it's kind of considered like an island of old silty clay and sedimentary soils. And it's also protected geographically by features on all sides. So it's just got a different climate from the Shahala Mountains, which is why it was granted its own. And then Yamhill Carlton is just to the west of that, which is where Elk Cove is located, at least where their winery and their tasting room is located. And in fact, if you look at this map, it's almost exactly where those little dots end in Yamhill is right about where Elk Cove is, kind of in that northwest corner of that appellation. This one has, so most of the vines are planted on the west side of that valley facing east, just to give it a lot of sun exposure, as much as you can to you know, obviously allow ripening in a cooler climate. So this map is really cool. I got it off the internet, but I wanted to let you guys know that the library actually has a really interesting book about wine maps. Well, here, I'll stop sharing this now. It's actually called The World Atlas of Wine. And I know they have, I don't know which edition they have, but if you kind of like to geek out about maps like I do, I highly recommend you check it out. Because it has not just this map that we looked at here, but all the wineries in detail there. You can really like look at it and say, this is exactly where this wine is from. It's really interesting. Speaking of that exactly, my friend Laura also showed me a really cool website where you can access soil samples from the exact place where these wines came from. And in fact, you can do this with any area. I'll have to get the name and get back to you guys. But let me show you a picture of the vineyards on the estate property of Elk Cove. Here is their estate property. The tasting room is right there in the middle. And our Pinot Blanc that we're tasting right now is actually what would be the farthest left and then top of those 3 vineyards right there. That's exactly where this wine is from. So it's really cool to be able to look at this and see exactly where your wine is from. We also looked at the soil samples from this vineyard and found out that yes, it is mostly those derived from the rocks that we talked about earlier. But actually these vineyards, both these places where the yellow numbers are where the soil samples were taken. And these soils actually derive from a landslide. So even this area has a very unique microclimate that is very specific to itself. So that's why it's really cool to taste those individual wines that kind of really give you that sense of place. So in general, summers in the Willamette can be cool, cloudy, and damp. They do seem to be getting warmer and drier as the years go on, as we all probably are aware. Probably one of the bigger threats is autumn rains can pose a challenge to the vineyard. If they sit in before the grapes have had enough time to ripen, the producers might have to make a decision about, when they can harvest and without having to drop too much fruit or having those grapes be overwatered. Most of the top vineyards in Willamette Valley are planted between 200 and 1,200 feet elevation. And in fact, I read that most of these appellations don't actually even start until 200 feet elevation. So when I was talking about having like really rich soils in the valley floor, that's not necessarily conducive to grape growing. Most grapes do well in vineyards that, as they say, make them struggle, but maybe have a little more kind of like mineral input to them, and not too much virility there. A lot of these vines are planted on hillsides. Also, the valley floor has a higher risk of frost damage, and so you don't obviously want to expose many vines to that. And also, the hillsides allow for more sun exposure throughout the day, even though up in Willamette, they actually get sunlight until 10 p.m. in the summers, which makes me super jealous. That helps with the cooler climate too, to allow the grapes to ripen. The main grapes of this region are Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, and Riesling. But in spite of that many grapes being listed, almost 2/3 of the plantings in Willamette are Pinot Noir. So we've talked about how the vineyards were formed, but now I'll talk about the social history of Willamette. So many of these vines have actually probably been planted within some of your lifetimes, because the first Vitis vinifera grape vine, which is the species that we drink, most of our wines are Vitis vinifera grapes. The first one was planted actually in 1961. Richard Sommer and David Lett, both graduates of UC Davis, which has a really good enology program out there in California. They really helped put Willamette on the map. Sommer planted grapes, including Pinot Noir, in Willamette in 1961. And in the mid-1960s, David Lett established Erie Vineyards with his own plantings. One of the first times Oregon Pinot received international recognition was in 1979. I apologize if I butcher this, but Galt Malot, which was a French restaurant guide, sponsored an international Olympiad of wine. The Erie Vineyards 1975 South Block Reserve scored in the top 10 of its category. And then in 1980, the winners of the Olympiad were challenged to a rematch, and the same wine placed second. So this is really a time when, like, globally, nobody knew about Willamette. Nobody really, you know, I don't want to say respected, but even knew about it or even considered it to be what it is today. And of course, having been born after the 70s, I didn't get to experience this and be like, yeah, this is common sense. To me, it's mind blowing that a place so renowned could be unknown in just so few decades away. You know, what Sesame Street's probably been on since then. But after that, in New York, in 1985, the International Wine Center held a Burgundy challenge to compare 15 of the top Oregon Pinots with a similar number of high-quality Burgundies. All were from 1983, and all tasters were experts. And all 5 of the top-scoring wines were from Oregon. So, again, something that was just completely unrecognized really blew the top off of maybe what people thought about Pinot Noir and what people thought about what these winemakers were doing out in Oregon right now. Slowly but surely, more independent-minded people came into this region to try their hand at grape growing and winemaking. But it wasn't just the ingenuity of these folks that made this area a success. It was their collaboration with each other. During our visit there, the winemakers were so proud to tell us stories about helping each other with harvest. If someone's equipment broke, they were there and they would, you know, no charge, no nothing. It was just, bring it on over here. We'll figure out how we'll get this done without your equipment functioning. There was a big sense of community. And even in the winemaking trade, they would tell each other what's working, what's not, what, you know, vine clones are you using, what rootstock, and everyone was really working together to get this place on the map. So it was pretty cool. And then as far as the history of the winery goes, so Pat and Joe Campbell founded Elk Cove Winery. Pat met Joe while they were teenagers picking strawberries on a farm in Oregon for spending money. Pat's family had been farmers in Oregon for generations. Joe went to Harvard and then Stanford Medical School. After he was back in 1974, they decided to follow their dream and establish Elk Cove Vineyards in Willamette. At this time, there were fewer than 10 wineries in Oregon. Oh, and here's a picture of Elk Cove circa 1974. They lived in a trailer on the farmstead for their first year, but then they built a house out of reclaimed wood and converted the old homesteader's barn into a winery. So on the left there, I assume is the reclaimed wood house. On the right there is the winery. They actually chose to call their winery Elk Cove because that winter a herd of 40 Roosevelt elk bedded down next to their trailer. This, plus the bowl shape of their property, inspired the name. Joe worked nights in the ER. Pat managed the business, and they both worked long hours at the winery in order to make this a success. They had 5 children, and of the 5 kids, I mean, all of them worked at the winery, of course, but their son Adam took a particular interest in the winery. After he attended college, he started learning the craft of winemaking from his parents. He took over as head winemaker in 1999 and is still the winemaker there today. So here's a more recent picture of this winery. And this one's kind of cool because you can kind of see the topography of the area too. And there's actually even more vineyards down on the left here, but you can see the mountain view and everything. He oversees 6 vineyard sites with 380 planted acres. That's over 10 times the total acreage of all of Oregon vineyards when Pat and Joe planted their first vine in 1974. Today, there are more than 20,000 acres of grapes planted and over 700 wineries in the state. Pat and Joe have since retired, but you might be able to spot Pat working in the flower gardens and Joe pouring a bottle of wine in the tasting room from time to time. Now, since I think the point of this group is more or less to visit this place while we're all stuck at home, I'll give you a little rundown of what my impression was of the Willamette Valley and the people who've chosen to make their wine here. Not gonna lie, I love the fact that a sizable number of female winemakers in the world are in Willamette. In fact, Elk Cove has a female associate winemaker named Heather Perkin. As of 2015, there were more female winemakers in Oregon than in California, even though Oregon only has 1/27th of the acreage of California. There's just a fantastic balance of welcoming ambiance. It's not super grandiose, but it's still just a lovely place to visit. Everybody has, nice, clean, pretty tasting rooms. Like I said, that attitude of camaraderie and just sharing knowledge and sharing what they love about this place. I read somewhere that Oregon is a bunch of dropouts and exes. It's people who used to make wine in California and wanted to go hang out in Oregon instead, and people who dropped out of college, whatever. Everybody's just following a dream and seems to be having a really great time out there doing it. Yeah. So to sum it up, I would say the people here are just as nerdy about wine as I am. They really do care about what they're producing, doing it honestly and with integrity. Of course, it's beautiful out there too. The food is awesome. So yeah, once we can all get out of here, I highly recommend a visit there. I'm going to share one more picture of one of their vineyards just so we can all get super jealous. This is actually their 5 Mountain vineyard. Oh no, hold on. This is in Shahala Mountains. So they call it 5 Mountain Vineyard because you can actually see 5 mountain peaks from this area. And so here it is, probably in the morning with the fog rolling in. Just beautiful. Okay. So now that I've said everything I can think of about the Willamette Valley, let's talk about these wines, shall we? I hope you like Pinot because that's what we're drinking today. They actually started doing DNA testing on grapes in the 90s to determine the parentage of grapes and discovered that Pinot Blanc, which is what we're drinking as far as the white wine goes, and Pinot Noir are actually genetic mutations of each other. There's also one called Pinot Gris. The grape is so old, they don't actually know which one was the original, but it's a highly mutatable grape. And so they're all actually just mutations of each other. They're not parents or siblings or anything. Okay, so last night, Kathy and I were practicing because I don't use Zoom very much. And we got to talking about a flavor wheel. Because if you don't spend all day reading tasting notes like I do, maybe some of these descriptors aren't super like right there on the top of your head. Maybe they're just a little bit harder to put your finger on. So we thought we would taste some wine today and I could share this image of a flavor wheel. Or if you want to search one, this one might be kind of hard to read. They're all kind of small. But if you wanted to take a look at this, we can taste the wines. So the first wine we're tasting is Elk Cove Pinot Blanc 2019. The nose to me has apple, white peach, pear, honeysuckle. Depending on the temperature of your wine too, it can be a little muted. So if you're not getting a lot right now, feel free to kind of cup it in your hands. We always say it's a lot easier to warm a wine up if it's too cold than it is to chill it if you're in a pinch. So also, I know you all have attended one of these before, so you can probably handle this, but you know, give it a little swirl. It'll help release the aromatics there. You can kind of look at the color by pointing the glass away from yourself. And especially in a room like mine where everything is very warm looking, you might hold a piece of paper up behind it so that you can get a really good impression of what color the wine is if you'd like to assess the visuals. But yeah, for this one, I guess I'm gonna take a sip. I'll have to stop talking, huh? So I get like a little bit richer texture. I mean, I don't know about you all, but for me, it's, should I stop sharing this? Has it been too long? For me, it's a little hard not to compare Pinot Blanc to Pinot Grigio, just because they are in the same family. But for me, this has a little bit more texture, a little more body, more kind of apple and pear notes to it, and a little bit of that kind of floral note. Little bit of honey, nice texture to it. And actually I get a little bit of pear skin texture and pear flesh as much as I do the smell and the flavor of it. As far as pairings go, I would recommend some sort of like grilled whitefish would be great with this. Also a salad with like walnuts, pears, a vinaigrette on there. I think that would be a really nice pairing. So should we unmute people and see if anyone has their own take on these?
Sure, and I'll just, in the meantime, before we get to the last two, we do have some comments and questions from the chat.
Sorry.
First, this first one's about Cork and Barrel. Are your only locations in Lawrence, or is Cork and Barrel found elsewhere?
Sorry, the sun's setting and things are getting weird here. Yeah, we actually legally in Kansas, one family can only own 2 liquor stores. So the one would be where I work at, and then the other is at 9th and Mississippi. Those are both family owned since 1997, almost as long as Willamette now.
And Lawrence Taster says Jana's wine finds are wonderful.
Thank you.
Connie says this is fascinating. Love the geography. And to me, that's so interesting that, you know, there are people who love the science of it, love the soil or the topography or the geography. And then my favorite thing was the elk. You know, the elk just,
yeah,
however many, yeah, or the stories. It's just so interesting to me what people react to. And then Suzanne asks, are any of these guys making wine now in the Rogue Valley? Any idea how the characteristics of the Pinot Noir compare between the two?
So Elk Cove Winery doesn't own any property in the Rogue Valley, but we do carry some wines and actually hope to do a kind of Cork and Barrel sponsored one with a winery called Forest, who has also a female winemaker. They're in the Rogue Valley. They make all kinds of interesting stuff. They have a Pinot Noir down to Moscato to Sangiovese. And so we're hoping to plan something next month with them as actually a fundraiser for our annual charity Imbibe.
Okay. And we'll talk about that at the end if there's time. And I just want to get through all the questions. And how are the Rieslings? Pretty crisp compared to Rhine or Moselle, or are they sappy?
Oh, yeah. So the Rieslings in the Rogue Valley, actually both of them have great acidity because they are like, well, up here in Willamette, we're looking at cooler climate. So you know, I don't want to say they're exactly the same. There's usually a New World twist on them, but I would say that they're definitely like on the drier side. And then the forest that we carry from the Rogue Valley is actually also, they make some really dry ones. They're really great.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have a comment about the white, the Pinot Gris? Need to look at my full screen here. Anybody else have their own review or tasting notes, things? Are you tasting the pear? You could just nod. You're tasting the pear, good.
Tastes like grapes, lady. No.
What's that? Who's talking?
Oh, that was me.
Okay.
Ed Everett is talking. Where's the
Yeah, Chris Everett.
Hi, Chris.
Or-
Oh, where's the Rogue Valley?
Yeah.
Oh,
Rogue Valley is actually in like southern Oregon, pretty close to California. And in between Rogue and Willamette is a little one called Umpqua, Umpqua Valley. So they're just like lesser known from southern Oregon.
okay, let's move on to the next one, I think, just in the interest of time.
Sure. So next we're going to do Pike Road. Starting in the 70s, the Campbell family has been able to purchase 6 different vineyard sites for their wines. So we've looked at a couple of them. They actually have 6 different vineyard sites throughout the Willamette Valley. Since they recently acquired some of these, they had long-standing contracts with a few different other vineyards in the area. But now that they have all of this of their own vineyards, they actually started making this Pike Road wine, which is what you call like a second label, because it's not under the Elk Cove label, but they're still purchasing those fruits that they've actually been putting in their first label initially, which kind of gives you like a really good value. And besides that purchased fruit, they also use anything that doesn't go into their Elk Cove estate, and it goes into this wine. So like $16.99, really great value, tastes like Willamette, which most of the time you got to spend like $25, $35 to get something that even tastes like Willamette. So I'm pretty excited about it. As far as, you know, flavors I get, a lot of cherry cola, tinge of herbaceousness, rose. When I first opened it, I actually got freshly baked bread, which maybe isn't typical, but that's just what I smelled. Lean palate, bright fruit on the front, medium acid, kind of lighter tannins, a little finish of orange rinds, but you know, I like it. What do you all think?
Chris wants to know, how long have these been aged? In a barrel, in concrete, eggs, or what?
Oh, actually, I have that here. I want to give you stats, but here we go. This one is actually 10 months and 15% new French oak barrels. So not a ton of oak, but a little bit there. I get a little bit of that kind of oaky tannin, which somehow tastes different to me than grapey tannin. I can't explain it.
So with these nose notes, I'm sure that's a term, would they change, like if, you know, you uncork a bottle of wine and say you don't give it much air at first, I'm guessing that it would change, one of these wines would change drastically. Like if you were the type to nurse a glass of wine for say 20, 30 minutes, I probably am not that person. But I mean, wouldn't the notes change pretty drastically as it was exposed to the air?
Right, yeah. Between, of course, like oxidation can help like release the aromatics, and also we'll change the flavors of the wine after a day or two or three. In fact, like this, I opened these yesterday to make my tasting notes, and today it tastes a lot more mature. It was it was a little closed yesterday, a little lean tasting, and I mean, well, of course, Pinot Noir is supposed to taste lean. Today it definitely has a lot more, I don't know, a lot more personality.
So what did you do overnight to the wine? Did you just cork it back up and just reopen it before we start? Okay.
Yep, I just poured a glass, and I've seen wine professionals pour a little bit out, screw on the cap, and shake it up. I don't know if I could like put my stamp of approval on that, but that's one method to oxygenate that wine pretty quickly.
So Craig wants to know, are these both 100% Pinot Noir grapes versus blended?
So in Willamette, they actually they have made their own criteria for Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and a few of their other top grapes. They have to use at least 90% of that grape in order to label a wine with that variety. So while these say like 100% Willamette fruits, I can't guarantee that it's 100% Pinot Noir, but it's at least 90, which is a lot more than the national standard,
Okay.
which is 75%, by the way.
If anyone has a question you'd just like to ask live, just do this and I'll unmute you. You don't have to ask your questions through the chat. But okay, well, why don't we move on to the third and last one?
Okay. So the third one is the Elk Cove Pinot Noir. So all 100% estate fruit. This is actually from the 2017 vintage, which is considered to be a more traditional vintage for Willamette Valley weather. This is actually the first year that they were using all of their own estate fruit and not purchased fruit. So it's kind of neat to be able to taste that milestone with them as well. As far as like tasting notes go, I would say, this one actually pours a little bit deeper ruby, in my opinion. As far as color goes, flavor and nose, very iconic Willamette with a little bit of earth in there, a little bit of baking spice, rose and violet notes for sure, vanilla, soft red plum. And I gotta taste it, confirm that these are still accurate today.
So you corked or uncorked all three wines yesterday?
The white I did not,
Mm-hmm.
because I had actually tasted it like last week and made notes on it. So that one's from today, but both of these, yeah. And a great sign of quality is that you can save them for the next day without much fuss and have it be, if it's even better on the second day, you've got yourself a good wine.
I was going to say, because it's not like I'm a connoisseur by any stretch, but I've never heard that before. Like this wine is actually better on the second day.
Oh yeah. Well, a lot of like, I don't know, a lot of wines that are on the higher spectrum of price and quality, they're made to age. And, people say it's a crime if you open a Barolo if it's not even 10 years old. So something like that, if you were to, prematurely open that wine, you would probably want to decant it, aerate it. I mean, it's basically like a slower version of aeration. Takes more planning.
Got it. Kathleen wants to know, how long will the uncorked wines last? Uncorked.
That, I think, is a very personal question for every wine. Some up to a week, some, on the second day, I'm scared to even look at it. So it just kind of depends. I guess just just try and find out. I mean, I guess don't risk it, but you're more than welcome to keep tasting it if you haven't finished it yet. And I'm sure you'll know when it's at its best.
I have a friend who shall remain nameless, but she won't, when she goes to a restaurant and orders a glass of wine, she'll make sure that it's not a bottle from yesterday. It doesn't matter what it is. She just, in her mind, it's not going to be as good. Sometimes that embarrasses me, but
Is she in the room? Are we calling people out now?
no, she's not in the room, or I wouldn't have mentioned it. But Maggie, did you have something to say?
I did. So what does Jana think about these aerators? That we got this from our son, and I don't know if it really does anything, or it's got a little strain. Anyway, what do you think about that, Jana?
I think that type takes too much coordination for the likes of me, but they do. But hey, if you're capable, by all means, it's certainly okay. I would advise that any wine you try, it's just like getting a kid to eat his vegetables, right? Like try it once. If you don't like it, then aerate it, or if you think it could be improved upon. But you know, some wines need it, some wines don't. But many wines, if you're opening it on the first day, you know, it wouldn't hurt to try a sample and see which is your favorite. But I do think that they work to a certain, to varying extents, really.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Just wave your hand. Scott wants to know, why do more expensive wines lend themselves to aging, but not less expensive, i.e. the cheap stuff he buys?
Well, of course, I guess I don't want to like make it sound like nothing cheap is ageable, but a lot of really expensive wines have really been crafted to lay down for 10 years before a person's supposed to enjoy them, and up to 40 or 50 years. So a lot of the $10 bottles you buy off the shelf are just kind of crafted to be ready to be drunk that night. And it's not that that's bad or anything like that. It's just more accessible, which I think is what most people would want a $10 wine to be, right?
Yeah, I think so. We won't talk about $2 Chuck. Suzanne asked, do these guys, and I'm assuming that means Elk Cove, do they do any late harvest Riesling? Ice wine? Probably not, but does it snow there? I know it snows on the mountain because I saw pictures.
Yeah. You know, they don't mention anything. I didn't see anything on their website about any sort of late harvest Riesling, and I don't think it gets super cold there in the winters. Most of when I was there, it was June, so it was not snowing. But everything that I've read, it's more like cool weather, maybe some frosts, but not necessarily like snowy ice wine kind of situations.
Okay. And I did want to give you the opportunity to talk about Imbibe. It's a fundraising event for which you curate a whole bunch of wines, right? It had to be postponed this year, but
right,
it's coming up in 2021.
That's the plan. Yeah, we've got a date reserved. It takes place at Abe and Jake's Landing, and I think it's April 11th next year, if I remember correctly. But the website with all the information is imbibelawrence.com. Every cent of your ticket, besides maybe venue rental, goes to Family Promise of Lawrence. So that helps families in our community that are experiencing homelessness. The event is amazing. We usually have a winemaker dinner on the Thursday before, and that's Stephanie Poe was supposed to be our winemaker from Forest Vineyards out of the Rogue Valley. And that's why we might be doing a kind of a Zoom tasting with her next month, hopefully, to help raise money for Family Promise as well. Then there's a grand tasting on that Saturday. There's over 120 wines to taste. There's food from a bunch of local restaurants, and Hy-Vee always brings us like the craziest, fanciest cheese you've ever seen, and it's a blast. And like I said, it's for a great cause too. So hopefully we'll get to do it in 2021.
Okay, and I've got one last question, so far anyway. How do you know when to drink now versus lay down for a while in the $40 to $60 range? Ask Jana.
That's why you're supposed to buy 3. By all means, feel free to ask me and I will tell you everything I know about that specific wine. It definitely depends because, you know, a $60 Chardonnay, you're probably going to want to drink before a $60 Barolo or something like that. So it's all subjective. Wine is a living, breathing thing, and it's fickle sometimes, but it's wonderful.
Yeah. Great. I lost you, Jack. Where did you go? Well, where's Jack? I think he left. Okay, well, Jack Altman, who was here and now he's not, says, I tried the wines with food. So tonight's wines he tried with food. I made 3 tarts: eggs, onion, creme fraiche, and eggs and onion, creme fraiche, and caviar, brown sugar caramel cheesecake, and ratatouille with gorgonzola. Jack, you should know, is an exquisite baker, and every other day he'll bring some goodie to the break room at the library for the staff. All 3 went well. The white was the best with, I don't know what that word is, THIAR? Anyone? But even the reds were good with the cheesecake. I've been to Imbibe and it's wonderful. So Jack, I'm sorry you went away, but I'll just get this on the record, the recording. Thank you for that. And Scott Morgan follows with, we had Triscuits. Oh, there he is. Okay. Anybody else have any questions before we let Jana go? Oh, Berettas, you need to be unmuted. No. Let's see. Anybody else want to say anything at all? I think what we're going to do is follow up for everyone who was here and send you, Suzanne left a link to a wine preserver that she likes a lot. We'll send you the flavor wheel. And that really helps me because I really, I can't taste something until someone plants the suggestion in my head. And then we'll give you the Imbibe information as well, so that you can all have that. You're welcome. Janet, thank you so much. I'm choking, Kathleen.
Whoa, thank you so much.
Well,
here.
thank you both. Kathy, I'm sure you'll be the best moderator we see all night tonight.
Oh God,
That
no.
is so true.
That is so not true.
Yeah, y'all are, if you'd like to unmute
Kristen
yourself,
is
you can
good.
thank
Kristen
Tina.
Walker is good. But no, I feel better now. I just want you guys to know that Jana does not do a lot of Zooms, and she was pretty nervous about tonight and, camera shy, if you will. And I just want to give her a huge round of applause.
Yay.
Thank you guys.
And tell
thank
you
you so
it
much.
went great. And I knew you could do it, and you did. So we
Hey,
hope to see
many
you
more.
in the store and around town at Imbibe and all kinds of places. And it's so
Right.
funny now, so many people are sitting in dark rooms. I think we should just maybe call it a night. Oh.
All right.
Anyway, thank you all for coming. I just very quickly want to say, we'll do this again next month. We have a couple of lines on some winemakers themselves with local ties. So we hope to get at least one of them in to maybe talk about Thanksgiving wines. I think it's actually the week before Thanksgiving, the next one. And then we have our Downsizers Club, our next meeting of the Downsizers Club on November 5th at 4 p.m. when we'll be talking about what your stuff is worth. So we'll help people help people, put value on all the stuff we have around, antiques and collections and whatnot. So anyway, have a good night. Please survive the debate, and enjoy the rest of your wine, but not too much. And I'm so glad nobody's driving. So thank you. Kathleen?
Yep. Good night. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.